They say the wind remembers everything, the cries it carries, the names it whispers. But here in Bighorn County, Montana, the wind has been forced to keep too many secrets for far too long. Over the last decade, a string of disappearances and murders of Indigenous women has haunted this land. Daughters taken, mothers broken, justice denied.
Welcome to Crime Bite.
In this channel, we peel back the layers of those hidden realities. Raw evidence, conflicting testimonies, and emotional pleas for help that too often come too late. By looking into these crime bites, you'll see firsthand how broken trust, systemic oversights, and chilling motives can converge into stories that rattle us to the core. If you find this exploration as vital as we do, be sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notifications button. Together, we can shine a light on the cases that demand attention, ensuring every voice, especially the silenced, finds the audience it deserves. Nestled in south-central Montana, Bighorn County stretches across vast plains, rugged terrain, and reservation lands of the northern Cheyenne and Crow tribes. Under that open sky, you'd expect the worst thing to be the silence of buffalo drifting across the horizon, not the silence of disappearing daughters, sisters, and cousins. Yet within this sprawling beauty lies one of America's darkest mysteries: the staggering disappearance and deaths of Indigenous girls and women, erased by fractured reporting, dismissed by underfunded jurisdictions, and buried in miscategorized cases. In cases like Henny Scott, 14, whose body was found far from home, labeled probable hypothermia; Kaysera Stops Pretty Places, 18, dismissed as runaway before her death; Selena Not Afraid, 16, whose body remained missing for months. The narrative is eerily identical. Early police simply declared them runaways or deaths due to exposure, without investigating foul play. Time magazine reports over 80 missing and murdered Indigenous women cases in Bighorn County alone, and thousands more across Indian country. This isn't a statistic, it's a generational wound. At issue here is not only loss, but invisibility. The victims' tribal identities often meant their stories didn't spark alerts. Investigators waited days to categorize them as missing. Public pressure never materialized. Media coverage evaded them. To understand this tragedy, we must ask, how many of these girls walked away on their own? How many were taken, trafficked? How many cases were simply absorbed into anonymity? In a country that prizes justice, how do entire communities of missing girls vanish without public outrage? What does it say about whose lives we value and whose disappearances go unanswered? On a cold October afternoon in 2014, 14-year-old Henny Scott left her mother's mobile home tucked into the northern Cheyenne reservation. She said she'd be back within an hour. She wasn't. Over the next days, the county sheriff's department assumed she had run away. Why wasn't an Amber Alert issued? Days went by before her disappearance was entered into law enforcement databases. Press coverage was virtually non-existent. For authorities, Henny was just another teen gone missing, nothing else. When Henny's body was found weeks later near a dirt track, local authorities ruled the death likely hypothermia. The medical examiner's report noted no signs of violence, no apparent struggle, not enough to suggest foul play. Northern Cheyenne and Crow community members disputed the findings, demanding a thorough investigation. However, the official narrative held no further detective work. Her name was removed from missing person listings. The file was closed. Another missing girl, another unanswered death. Her mother's pleas were met with shrugging shoulders and crickets. She was told the death was sad, but not suspicious. That failure echoed loudly across the reservation. If this is how a 14-year-old is treated, what hope did younger children have? When a community sees a dear child declared not worth the search, how deep does the betrayal run? And who speaks for children whose lives are considered expendable? 14 months after Henny's death, Bighorn County faced the disappearance of Kaysera Stops Pretty Places, nearly 18, on a spring evening in 2016. Kaysera boarded a bus from Sheridan to the Crow Agency to visit family. She carried her belongings casually, hoping for a short visit, but never returned home. 3 days passed before the sheriff's office marked her as missing. Local news simply described her as a young woman possibly away with friends. No Amber Alert, no roadblocks, no sense of urgency. Search parties launched only when family volunteers organized vigils with humming community lights. Ground search crews trudged through fields and sagebrush, but with no leads, no cameras, no local spotlight. Law enforcement considered it a runaway case. Then came the shock. Kaysera was found beaten and strangled by a rural backroad. Her body had been moved from where she might have died. Even law enforcement believed she died of strangulation, a thought that painfully echoed the past. Yet the official declaration remained, no signs of homicide. The county medical examiner cited undetermined, failing to identify clear trauma. Subsequent investigations yielded no arrests. The case concluded without resolution, swallowed by bureaucracy. Just days later, Henny's mother, attending one of the family vigils, voiced what so many feared: these girls are being killed, and we aren't being heard. The families of Henny and Kaysera realized the same broken process was repeating itself. Another Indigenous girl lost, another silent grave. Kaysera was 18, on the cusp of adulthood, but why did her disappearance get handled like an inconvenience? How many more times will Indigenous voices be sidelined in life and death? In the summer of 2017, just 2 years after Kaysera's disappearance, 16-year-old Selena Not Afraid went missing from her hometown near Crow Agency. Selena, a high school sophomore, was close to her family and friends. She had big dreams and was known for her kindness. When she didn't come home one evening, community members raised the alarm within 24 hours. In contrast to the previous 2 cases, law enforcement marked Selena missing quickly, but the investigation was minimal. She had no personal belongings bagged as evidence, no suspect interviews recorded, no route mapping. Yet when her body was discovered several months later, near open country, officials ruled the death undetermined. There was no in-depth forensic investigation. They never confirmed whether your death was accidental or caused by someone else. For Selena's community, the lack of closure stung with betrayal. Over time, frustration shifted to fear. Queens of Navajo calling from across the reservation began asking, what happens to our girls when no one's looking? This wasn't misclassification due to ignorance. It felt intentional. No Amber Alert, no public Amber Television appeal, no aggressive wide-scale investigation, just a cleared file and a name lost to the files. Their generational grief, simmering in a broken cycle of neglect, turned into resolve. The families coalesced into community groups, letter-writing campaigns to tribal agencies, and calls for federal oversight. Bighorn County found itself under pressure, not just from within, but from national activists, mothers fighting for their daughters, and news reporters uncovering a pattern. If Henny and Kaysera were silenced with shrugging official statements, what message did that send to Selena's community and to every Indigenous girl on that reservation? Bighorn County isn't just another rural region. It's one of the most legally entangled areas in the United States. Home to the Crow and Northern Cheyenne nations, it sits at the intersection of tribal, county, state, and federal jurisdiction. A maze that often leaves critical cases without anyone clearly responsible. When Indigenous women go missing or are murdered, this web of law enforcement responsibility becomes a barrier rather than a safety net. Tribal police may not have the authority to investigate non-native suspects. County sheriffs may lack cultural sensitivity or fail to prioritize Indigenous cases. The FBI, while technically responsible for major crimes on reservations, is often slow to intervene. If they intervene at all, in the cases of Henny Scott, Kaysera Stops Pretty Places, and Selena Not Afraid, jurisdictional confusion delayed responses and splintered accountability. One agency would blame another for the lack of progress. In some situations, important forensic evidence was lost or ignored because it wasn't collected quickly enough, or collected by the wrong agency. An internal audit in 2021 found that many missing persons reports filed on reservations weren't even entered into the National Crime Information Center database. In practical terms, that means some girls, like Henny, simply didn't exist in the system designed to find them. Local advocates began using the term investigative dead zones to describe the bureaucratic vacuum in Bighorn County. In these zones, cases languish because there's no coordinated leadership and everyone assumes someone else is handling it. These failures have consequences far beyond statistics. They tell families their child's case isn't worth the same effort as others. They erode trust, intensify trauma, and perhaps worst of all, let predators feel emboldened. If you called for help and 4 different departments said, "It's not our case," Would you still feel protected by the system or betrayed by it? Amid the heartbreak, silence, and systemic failure, one force has emerged stronger than any legal institution: the mothers. The women who raised the missing, the women who buried their daughters, the women who refused to stay quiet. Paula Castro, Charlene Allrunner, Misty Stops Pretty Places, and Geraldine Gray are among the many Indigenous mothers who've become the public voices of a crisis once buried under official indifference. Their grief, raw and unfiltered, became a rallying cry. They've held press conferences when police wouldn't. They've organized community searches when law enforcement stopped looking. They've testified before Congress, painted their faces red in protest, and placed their daughters' names into the national narrative. In 2020, the name Selena Not Afraid became a lightning rod for this movement. After her body was found 20 days after she disappeared near an I-90 rest stop, her mother Jackie Big Hair refused to let the world forget. "My baby is not just another statistic," she told national reporters. "She was loved. She was light." That same year, Montana lawmakers and activists, many of them Indigenous women themselves, pushed through a series of groundbreaking reforms. The Missing and Murdered Indigenous Persons Task Force was created to streamline communication between tribal and state authorities. The Looping in Native Communities Act was passed to improve data reporting and case tracking. Tribal liaison roles were appointed in sheriff's departments and state agencies to ensure Indigenous voices had a seat at the table. But no policy can replace a daughter, and no law can erase decades of pain. That's why the movement goes beyond legislation. It's about visibility, about red dresses on overpasses, about hashtags like Justice for Selena, MMIW, and No More Stolen Sisters, flooding social media with faces the world ignored. Activists have turned grief into momentum. Their grassroots efforts include self-funded billboards with faces of missing women, youth-led art installations reclaiming community walls, community patrols and rapid response groups operating where police won't. Through their determination, mothers and daughters of Bighorn County are redefining what justice looks like. Not just as a verdict in a courtroom, but as a collective awakening. If justice is not given, can it be built from the ground up by those who carry the pain? What would it take for you to become a voice for the voiceless? There is no ending yet, no courtroom closure, no silver bullet. But there is something stronger, a movement born from pain, lit by love, and carried forward by women who refuse to forget. From Henny Scott to Selena Not Afraid, from the ridgelines of Crow Nation to the halls of Congress, the voices are getting louder. You've heard the stories, you've seen the faces, now it's your turn to act. Like if you believe every woman deserves to return home. Comment your thoughts or share the name of someone who still waits for justice. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story the world tried to ignore. Join the movement, share their names, fight for justice.